Hey, what's up? Today I want to talk about one crucial aspect of game development, that it is player feedback. But hey, I'm not talking about any feedback that the player gives to your game, I'm talking about the exactly opposite thing, the feedback that the game gives to the player. To put it simple, this feedback is the way that the game communicates with the player, providing essential information about the current game state. Let's start with an example. Here I have a game, a really simple one. It features a sorcerer that shoots fireballs. If this sorcerer touches the enemy, it receives damage. If 3 fireballs hit the enemy, it gets destroyed. As you can see, it's quite bland. Essentially, this game only offers 3 types of feedback: the heart disappearing, the sprite movement, and the enemy disappearing. Let's take a look at other games and see how they approach giving feedback to their players, so we can use it in your own game. Let's go back to 1995, when Terra Enigma was released. This game isn't very well known, so it might be a good opportunity for you to discover a cool new game and also learn something new. Terra Enigma is an action RPG, so all combat happens in real time. Because of that, a lot of feedbacks needs to be given to the player. Now let's take a look at a few seconds of gameplay, paying attention to the feedback it gives to the player. Just by watching a few seconds of gameplay, we can notice a lot of feedback being sent. Going back to the first enemy encounter, when the player attacks the enemy, we can notice 4 different feedbacks. Let's watch it frame by frame. When the player lands an attack, the enemy flashes, becoming transparent. It displays a number showing the damage amount. When the enemy dies, it plays an explosion animation, and lastly, it plays a sound. With this feedback, the game tells the player everything that's happening, making it clear in which state the game is. Now, let's go back to our game and add some of the feedback we just observed. I will add the damage flash. It's crucial to tell the player when its attack landed correctly on the enemy. I will also add the death animation and play the sound when the enemy dies. That way the player will know it does not need to keep attacking the enemy or not even worry about it. Yeah, it's still not great, but better than before. Now let's take a look on another game. This one's called Legend of Mana, originally released for the PlayStation 1. Let's see a few seconds of combat in this game that have a slightly different approach to player feedback. It has a lot of effects, a bit too much I would say. Sometimes if you clutter the screen with too many visual effects and sounds, the important feedback ends up getting hidden. It's important to know how to prioritize the feedback sent, so the most important ones, like the player receiving damage, gets highlighted. In this game, what grabs my attention the most is when the spear damages an enemy, there's an animation being played to show that the damage happened. This improves on what we talked about earlier, telling the player that its damage landed correctly. There's also a life bar being shown when the enemy gets damaged. Depending on the game, it's important to tell the player how much life the enemy has left, so they can prioritize which enemy they want to defeat first. Of course, some games does not need it, but I think this could be useful for our game. Now let's go back to our game and add these changes. Now our game have a particle effect when the enemies hit, and it also have a life bar represented by 3 hearts. All those games that we analyzed before were relatively old games. Technology has evolved a lot since then, so let's take a look on a more modern game. Maybe not what you're expecting, but let's see the game Brotato. Brotato is an indie game where the objective is just to survive waves of enemies. Between each wave you can choose perks and buy new equipment, and that's pretty much the whole objective of the game. Let's watch a bit of gameplay. Brotato does everything that we saw in the previous games. It has feedbacks for almost everything happening in the game. Damage feedback, item pickup, death sound, sprite flash, everything. One thing I noticed is that when enemies are moving, they don't have an animation with the new sprites. They just wiggle to represent movement. That's a really good approach to making our game more professional, without spending too much time drawing new sprites. Now let's go back to our game and apply some of these feedbacks we just learned. Now our mage wiggles a bit when moving, and our enemy has a scale animation idle. The enemy being animated like this is really important, especially in a game with a limited color palette like this one. It shows to the player that there's something interactive there, and that the player should pay attention to it. Now let's take a look on our final game. This game is a masterpiece, loved by many, and it does pretty much everything we learned in this video so far in terms of player feedback. Of course, the game I'm talking about is yeah, one of the Zelda games. Let's take a look on a few seconds of gameplay of A Link to the Past, released on 9/1. You can see some feedback, and all of them are a bit spaced out so it does not get crowded with the effects and sounds already in place. The damage that the player receives is evident by the sound, animation and flashing. This is an important feedback. They've made it so the sound being played is different from any other sounds on the screen to make the damage feedback really pop out. Okay, let's keep watching. You notice how many player feedbacks are in this small clip of gameplay? A lot of them. It's not a coincidence that Zelda is a masterpiece. We have feedback when the player gets downstairs, P1 text showing the floor the player is on at the moment. When the player does damage to the enemy, it plays a unique sound, combined with a sprite flashing. When the enemy is defeated, another sound and animation are played. The item being dropped by the enemy plays a unique sound, and when the player picks it up, there's another sound. Opening the chest, and even the text box has feedback. When the player presses the button to skip the text, it makes a sound. Playing this game is like taking a game design class. It does so much and so well. And there's much more to it. Enemies also telegraph their attacks before attacking, meaning that they play a small animation before executing the attack. And the game has much more feedback than those shown. So many things that we cannot fit them all in our game, but we can use what we learned to improve our game. Now the enemy throws a fireball in the direction of the player. It plays a sound when it hits something. It's a unique sound if it hits a wall, or if it hits a player, or if it hits the enemy. The enemy has a pre-attack animation, and when the player receives damage, it flashes and has a new sprite to show damage. If we compare our first version with our final one, we can see a huge improvement. This improvement isn't just visual, it affects gameplay directly, and all of those improvements can be done in less than half an hour. You just need to be creative. Well, that's all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you for watching, leave a comment on what you think is the most important player feedback, and I see you next time.